Congratulations! Hello! Today I'm going to talk about balding, and the room fell silent. Yes, few things are scarier to dreadheads than thoughts involving hair loss. Dreadlocks are generally pretty resilient. In some ways they're like weeds. Yes, I get that that sentence does not have the most positive of connotations, but dreadlocks, like weeds, can stand up to a lot of abuse on the existing length. So you can do all sorts of nasty things to the existing length, and as long as the roots are still safe, as long as the roots are still healthy, they will continue to grow out unaffected. But, like with weeds, if you kill the root, you're gonna kill the dreadlock. So in this video I'm going to talk about some of the situations that can lead to hair thinning, hair loss, balding with dreadlocks, the symptoms, and what, if anything, you can do about it. Okay, so the first instance of hair loss is probably not going to come as a surprise to anyone out there, and that is natural hair loss due to age. Yep, it's no surprise that as you get older, you can suffer from your hair thinning out. Guys are most often going to be hit worse than girls, but it's going to differ from person to person. Natural hair loss is going to affect dreadheads the same as non-dreadheads. Some people often ask, if you have dreadlocks, are you immune from natural hair loss? Because when hairs fall out with non-dreads, kind of just gets blown away, washed away, falls out. But if you've got dreadlocks, it stays trapped in the dread. And while this is true, natural hair loss is going to affect your roots, going to lead to your roots thinning out over time. And while the hairs that do still continue to grow will get locked in, as you get older and your hair thins, the roots will thin and you'll get more bald lines opening up. So natural hair loss due to age is my first instance. There are, however, a few situations that can lead to unnatural hair thinning or increased rate of hair thinning that can otherwise be avoided. These are situations that lead to your dreadlocks causing stress on your scalp. Situations that can lead to traction alopecia. Now, traction alopecia is not something that only affects dreadheads. Various hairstyles that pull tight on your scalp can lead to traction alopecia, but dreadheads are at particular risk due to some of the things that some people do to their hair. Okay, so some of the most common things that can lead to dreads causing stress at the scalp level: intensive root maintenance, extreme dreadlock length, extreme dreadlock weight, and styles that lead to the dreadlocks being pulled really tight from your scalp. First off, we've got the intensive dreadlock root maintenance. Now, I do not personally encourage or recommend the maintenance of dreadlock roots. I believe that roots should be left alone to do their thing so that your dreadlocks can mature and lock up at the roots naturally and therefore continue to grow out locked without, the need to go in and force the hairs to knot up. I think this is best for the dreadlocks because the dreads just continue to grow naturally for free without any worry. But another reason not to do it is because it can lead to these hair thinning issues. Now, there are many different root maintenances, and they're not going to all affect your roots in the same way. But if you're going in and you're maintaining your roots, if it's causing hairs to get pulled or twisted, when those hairs are pulled or twisted, it can cause stress at the scalp level. You can end up pulling hairs out, and then over time you can find that those little section lines, the little part lines, get wider and wider. You can find that when you're doing the maintenance, you're pulling on the dreadlock equally, so you're only applying pressure to one area, but it's going to be pulling more on the hairs that are at the extremes. So the hairs at the edges are going to get pulled on more than the hairs in the middle, and it's these hairs that will over time get damaged and lead to the increased thinning and visible section lines between the dreads. So while I don't encourage or recommend root maintenance in general, a good rule of thumb would be that if after the maintenance your scalp is sore, your hair feels like it's being pulled really tight, or the dreadlocks are pulling against your scalp, it's probably pulling too tight and is going to put you at risk of issues down the line. Another thing I mentioned was extreme dreadlock length, extreme dreadlock weight. As the dreadlocks get older, they get longer, and obviously as they get longer, they get heavier. Now, dreadlocks by themselves don't weigh that much. They're just made of hair. They only weigh as much as the hair that makes them up, and hair doesn't weigh an awful lot. But the longer they get, the more water they can soak up, and wet dreadlocks can weigh an awful lot more than dry dreadlocks. And if you're going around with dreadlocks that are consistently pulling tight against your scalp, you can find that the lines between the dreadlocks, the areas between the dreadlocks where the hair gets parted, get wider over time with just hairs getting pulled and pulled. But as I said, it does take extreme dreadlock length to lead to extreme dreadlock weight, so it's not really something that is going to affect an awful lot of people. By the time they're heavy enough to cause particular damage to your roots, they're going to also be pretty noticeable on your neck anyway. The final situation I'm going to cover is instances where dreadlocks are styled in a way that causes them to be pulled really tight. Now, whether you've got dreadlocks or not, if you're styling your hair in a way that causes it to be pulled really tight, you put yourself at risk of detraction alopecia. So if you have your hair pulled tight in a really tight ponytail, can lead to your hair slowly receding at the forehead, and so it is also a risk with dreadlocks if you're tying your dreads up in a way where you can feel that the edges of the roots of the dreads are getting pulled on really tight. You can find that the lines between the dreads do widen over time. So aside from the natural hair loss, all the other things I've covered are situations, like I said, that stress the scalp, situations where your hair is getting pulled, situations where the outer edges of the roots are getting pulled on more than the rest of the dread, so they're sort of load bearing, and therefore if you're finding that your dreads are being pulled on, leaving your scalp sore, you should probably step in and try and address the problem. Next up, we got symptoms of balding, hair loss, hair thinning with dreadlocks. Now, with the natural hair loss, you're gonna see it in the same places as you would whether you had dreadlocks or not. So with guys, you're gonna tend to find it in the male pattern baldness areas. So you can find that your hair starts to recede here and here, on top, on the crown here. Symptoms from the other things that I mentioned can occur all over the head depending on where the dreadlocks have been pulled. What you will find is that the roots start to thin. Hair loss, hair thinning is not going to affect the dreadlock that is already grown, the hair that's already out, but it will lead to your roots becoming thinner. Over the long term, this means that the dreadlocks will grow thinner and thinner over time, but over the short term, it means that you're going to start to see the areas between dreadlocks more clearly because there's not as much hair there to cover all the space. And you also find that as the roots get thinner, the roots also become weaker. So while the length of the dread remains the same weight, has the same pull against your scalp, as the roots get thinner, there's going to be fewer hairs there to hold the rest of the dread up. As time goes by, if things keep getting thinner and thinner and thinner, you can end up with dreadlocks falling out. So if you are experiencing natural hair loss and your hairline recedes and recedes and recedes, your roots will get thinner and thinner and thinner. The dreadlock remains the same weight, you don't lose hairs from within the dreadlock, so it will continue to pull and pull as it did when you had full healthy roots. Roots get thinner and thinner until it gets to the point that maybe you're washing your hair and falls out because there's just not enough support there. With the other situations, the unnatural hair thinning, you're kind of in the same situation but not necessarily in the same localized areas, in that the roots of the dreadlocks can get thinner and thinner, and as the dreadlocks pull with the same amount of force, you can end up with some getting pulled out completely, and that's not something that you want. So the first thing you'll notice is the roots thinning. You'll notice this before the dreadlocks actually start to grow out thinner, and you'll be able to more clearly see the lines between the sections, so either the section lines or just the part lines between the dreadlocks will become more apparent, and then over the longer period, the dreadlocks will grow out thinner and the roots become weaker. Okay, so if you find yourself in one of these situations, what, if anything, can you do about it? First off, unfortunately, if you're experiencing natural hair loss, receding hairline, hair loss due to age, there's not an awful lot you can do to reverse it or stop it. I don't have a cure for baldness. If I did, I'd probably, be on some sort of desert island somewhere receiving checks for my invention and not creating YouTube videos. All you can really do is survive it, try and get through it. Unfortunately, it's just sort of a card you get dealt in life and you have to deal with it, and deal with it you must as best you can. What you should do is try not to make the situation any worse. It should go without saying that if you're experiencing issues due to one of the things I've previously mentioned, such as maintenance, weight, styling, you should take a step back and try and adjust your situation accordingly, such as possibly relaxing on the root maintenance, cutting it out altogether, being aware of your dreadlock weight and how that is pulling on your scalp. And for styling, be aware of some of the stress that can occur on your roots from the ways that you're tying them up. Other things you can do, you can trim your dreadlocks shorter to relieve some of the stress on your scalp. Trimming dreadlocks shorter gives some immediate weight reduction in that you have less dreadlock there, less weight. It also means that there's less dreadlock there to soak up water, so they don't weigh as much when they're wet. And also there's less dreadlock to dry. Something else that you can find is that dreadlocks, after having been cut, will have softer tips that also drain water faster, which means they will dry faster and therefore be wet and heavier for shorter periods of time. You can also try and release some of the stress that can occur when you're shaking out damp dreadlocks. When your dreadlocks are very long and wet and you try and shake them out, you can find that as they swing around, that weight really starts to pull on your head. You can avoid this by, instead of just shaking straight out from your head, you can hold the dreadlock by the root and shake them out like this. This means that your hand is holding the weight and it's not pulling on your scalp in the same way. You can also wear your dreadlocks up in different ways to relieve some of the stress on your scalp. If you wear a dreadlock tam, which is a hat specifically designed for holding dreadlocks, that will hold the dreadlocks up and relieve some of the stress on your scalp. Your scalp will no longer be taking the weight of the dreadlocks, it will be taken up by the hat. So that is good for keeping the weight off your head for a while. Tams will also be better than having your hair in tight ponytails if you're experiencing the dreadlocks being pulled by your tight ponytail. You can also wear headbands to scoop the dreadlocks back, which is an alternative to having them pulled tight back. Other things that you can do, things that will promote healthy hair growth with regular hair, will also be beneficial for dreadlocks. You want to keep your hair as healthy and strong as possible, so a good balanced diet can go a long way to setting that into motion, and there are also certain health supplements out there that can also help promote healthy hair growth, healthy hair roots. That was my video on dreadlock hair loss, balding, hair thinning. If you have any questions, comments, queries regarding dreadlocks in general or dreadlocks and balding, you can leave it down in the comment section below. If you found this video helpful, informative, if this video was useful to you, you can click the like button. If you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, you can subscribe. If you're looking for dreadlock tips, helps, advice, guides, videos, including this one, you can find all my stuff on lacedreads.com. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you again soon. Farewell!